All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving deep into something that I think a lot of people can relate to. That feeling of always wanting things to go just right, especially when it comes to people we care about. But what if, and hear me out here, what if loosening the reins a bit, letting go of that need to control every little thing could actually be the key to more freedom and stronger relationships?
Yeah, that's what Mel Robbins argues in her book, Let Them Theory. And we're going to break it all down.
It sounds kind of counterintuitive, right? Like,
Yeah,
how can letting go lead to more control?
exactly. It's like, how does that even make sense? But Robbins backs it up with a mix of like personal stories, sciencey stuff, and really practical advice. Like she talks about this whole thing with her son's prom, which as a parent, I can totally see being a stress fest waiting to
Oh,
happen.
absolutely. Prom, I mean, talk about a pressure cooker for parents and teens alike. Like, did she have everything meticulously planned out?
Totally. Like the whole 9 yards, the corsage, the dinner reservations, like this perfectly choreographed evening.
Mm.
And I'm guessing teenagers, being teenagers, her son and his friends probably weren't quite as invested in all the details.
You know it. And wouldn't you know it, prom night rolls around and boom, it starts pouring rain.
Oh, so what happened? Did the perfectly planned evening fall apart?
Well, that's the thing. Her son and his friends, they didn't even bat an eye. They just rolled with it. And it was at that point that Robbins realized she was the only one freaking out. Like her need to control this whole situation was just creating a ton of anxiety for herself, and she wasn't even really enjoying the evening.
That's a really good point, and it makes you think about like how much unnecessary stress we put on ourselves trying to control things we can't.
Totally. And that's where the science part comes in. The amygdala, that part of the brain that's all about fight or flight, the fear response.
Yeah, the one that gets triggered when we think we're in danger.
Right. Well, apparently trying to control things we can't, especially other people's actions, can actually trigger that same fear response.
Like our brains see this lack of control as a threat.
Exactly. So Robbins was basically stuck in this stress cycle, and it was all because of this primal part of her brain. Instead of enjoying this special night with her son, she's battling this internal anxiety storm.
Wow, it really puts things in perspective. So how do we break free from that? Like how do we stop our amygdalas from hijacking these moments?
Well, Robbins doesn't just leave us hanging with this big revelation. She gives us this tool, this concept she calls let them.
Okay, so instead of trying to control everything and everyone, we just let them.
Yeah. And to help explain it, she uses this really helpful analogy, the seesaw, like the playground kind of.
Oh yeah, I get it. So one side of the seesaw is what? All the things we can control.
Right, like our own actions, thoughts, and feelings. And
Yeah.
then on the other side, it's all the things we can't control, like
Mhm.
what other people do, what they think, how they feel.
So the more we obsess over those external factors, the more our side of the seesaw goes down.
You got it. We end up feeling powerless and frustrated because we're putting all our energy into something we can't actually change.
But when we let them be, it's like we're pushing off the ground, lifting our side of the seesaw and reclaiming that power.
It's such a good visual, right? And this doesn't mean we just give up or become passive. It's about strategically shifting our focus to what Robbins calls the let me side of the equation.
So let them is about releasing control, and let me is about taking charge of our own lives.
Exactly. There's this example Robbins gives about finding out that a group of her friends went on a weekend trip without her, like a girl's getaway.
Oof, that's got to sting.
I,
I
I
bet her first reaction was to take it personal.
Oh, totally. Like, why wasn't I invited? What's wrong with me? The whole spiral of self-doubt. But that's when the let them and let me combo swooped in and saved the day.
Okay, so how did she use let them and let me in that situation?
Well, first, she realized she couldn't control their decision, right? Like, they chose to go without her, and that was that. But what she could control was her own reaction.
So instead of dwelling on the exclusion, she focused on what she could do.
Right. And in this case, it was realizing that she had been, super busy with work and hadn't been making as much time for her friends.
Makes sense. Life gets in the way sometimes.
It totally does. So let them helped her detach from the negativity of the situation, and let me empowered her to take positive action. Like reaching out to her friends, making plans to connect.
Yeah, it's so powerful. So it's not about surrendering to the situation. It's about choosing how you respond to it.
Exactly. And sometimes the most empowering response is to let go of that need to control things we can't and focus on what we can. So how does this let them philosophy actually play out in our daily lives?
Well, I'm all ears. I can definitely use some strategies for dealing with those everyday frustrations.
Okay, so picture this. You're stuck in a ridiculously long line at the grocery store. You know, the kind where the cashier is moving at a glacial pace, and the person in front of you is having a full-blown conversation about their coupon collection.
Ugh, I can practically feel my blood pressure rising just thinking about it.
I know, right? It's like the ultimate test of patience. But here's where let them comes in.
Okay, so instead of fuming and getting all worked up, we just let them be slow and chatty.
Right. It's not about pretending it's not annoying. It's about consciously choosing where you focus your energy. Like, instead of getting sucked into the negativity, you can use that time to do something for yourself. Maybe listen to a podcast, call a friend, or just like take some deep breaths and practice some mindfulness.
So it's about shifting our attention away from the things we can't control and finding ways to make the best of this situation.
You got it. And it applies to all sorts of situations. Like, imagine you're at work and you've been killing it, going above and beyond, but that promotion you've been hoping for keeps getting delayed.
Ugh, yeah, that feeling of being stuck and overlooked.
Robbins would say, let them string you along. Like, don't waste your energy getting bitter and resentful.
Instead, we should focus on what we can control, like seeking out opportunities that truly value our talents and contributions.
Exactly. Maybe you start looking for a new job, one that offers more growth potential or a better work-life balance.
So let them stay stuck in their ways while you focus on creating the career you deserve.
Precisely. And sometimes let them means taking a more strategic approach to dealing with those, shall we say, challenging people we all encounter in life.
You mean those people who just seem to thrive on pushing our buttons? Oh, I know a few.
We all do. Robbins uses this hilarious example of someone who consistently doesn't pick up after their dog.
Oh, that's the worst. It's so inconsiderate. Like, do they think sidewalks are just giant dog potty zones?
Right. It's so tempting to, like, confront them, give them a piece of your mind.
Oh, totally. I'd be tempted to be like, hey, buddy, leash your dog and your lack of manners.
I know. But she suggests hitting pause and using let them strategically, like let them continue their inconsiderate behavior for a bit, observe the situation, and then decide if it warrants a response.
So we're not condoning their behavior, we're just choosing our battles wisely.
Exactly. Like, is it worth getting into a heated argument with a stranger over dog poop? Maybe not. But if it's a recurring issue or if it's impacting your property or your neighborhood, then maybe a more direct approach is needed.
It's about responding from a place of empowerment rather than reacting out of frustration.
I like that. Responding versus reacting. That's a good takeaway right there. But what about those relationships where letting go just feels so much harder, like family? Those dynamics can be so complex and emotionally charged.
Oh, absolutely. Family, it's like a whole different ball game.
Right. And it's in those situations that Robbins introduces this really powerful concept called frame of reference.
Okay, frame of reference, what's that all about?
It's about stepping outside of our own perspective and trying to see the world through the eyes of the other person. Like understanding that everyone has their own unique experiences, beliefs, and values that shape how they see things.
So it's about putting ourselves in their shoes, even if we don't agree with them.
Exactly. And it can be so eye-opening, especially when it comes to family. Like Robbins tells this story about how her own mother initially disapproved of her husband, Chris.
Really. So her mom didn't like Chris. What was her issue with him?
Well, from Robin's perspective, it felt like judgment, like a lack of support. But when she took a step back and tried to understand her mother's frame of reference, she realized that her disapproval actually stemmed from fear.
Fear. Fear of what?
Fear of losing her daughter.
Yeah.
Chris lived far away, and her mom was worried about Robin's moving away and being out of reach.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. It wasn't about Chris personally.
Yeah.
It was about her own fears and anxieties.
Exactly. And once Robbins understood that, she was able to approach the situation with more compassion and understanding. It didn't excuse her mother's behavior, but it helped her to see it in a different light.
That's such a valuable lesson, especially when dealing with family members who, let's be honest, can sometimes say or do things that just drive us crazy.
It's so true. Frame of reference doesn't mean we have to condone their behavior or let them walk all over us. It just helps us to see where they're coming from and to respond in a way that's more productive.
So it's about choosing understanding over judgment.
And that's where let them comes in again. It's recognizing that we can't control what other people think or say or do, but we can choose how we react. We can choose to engage in a productive conversation, set boundaries, or simply disengage.
It's a powerful reminder that we always have a choice, even in those situations where it feels like we're at the mercy of someone else's behavior.
Right. And sometimes the most empowering choice is to simply let go of that need to control the situation and focus on what we can control: our own thoughts, feelings, and actions.
It's about recognizing our own agency and choosing to respond in a way that feels good for us, rather than getting sucked into a power struggle.
Okay, and let's be real here. We've all fallen into the comparison trap at some point, you know? Scrolling through social media, seeing everyone's seemingly perfect lives, and feeling like we're not measuring up.
Oh, tell me about it. Social media is a masterclass in comparison. It's so easy to get caught up in the highlight reel and forget that everyone's struggling with something.
Exactly. And it can be so damaging to our self-esteem. Robbins even admits to falling victim to this herself. She talks about how she put off promoting her speaking business on social media for years because she was so afraid of being judged.
That fear of judgment is so real, it can be absolutely paralyzing.
It can. Like, she was so worried about what her friends and family would think, the whole, oh, look at her trying to be all fancy and successful kind of thing.
I totally get it. It's like we build up these scenarios in our heads, and they can be way worse than reality.
And it's in those moments that let them becomes this incredibly powerful tool.
Okay, so how does let them help with comparison?
It's about reclaiming our power by accepting that we can't control what other people think. Like, let them judge. You can't please everyone. And trying to do so is just going to leave you feeling exhausted and unfulfilled.
So instead of worrying about what others think, we should focus on let me pursue my passions. Let me share my gifts with the world. Let me build a life that feels authentic to me.
You got it. And here's the interesting thing. Robbins actually argues that comparison can also be our greatest teacher.
Wait, how can comparison be a good thing?
It's all about shifting our perspective and looking for the lessons hidden within those feelings of envy or inadequacy. Like, what can you learn from the people you admire? What are they doing that you could be doing too?
Oh, I see. So it's about using comparison as a source of inspiration and motivation rather than letting it drag us down.
Exactly. Like, she tells this story about a friend of hers who's an interior designer. This friend was struggling to get her business off the ground while someone she knew with, like, zero design experience was suddenly getting all this attention online.
So her friend was feeling jealous and resentful.
Totally. But then she had this realization, like, wait a minute, this other person's success isn't taking anything away from me. It's actually showing me what's possible. It's showing me that I can do this too.
So it motivated her to step up her game.
It did. She finally created a website, started posting on social media, and, put herself out there, and her business started to take off.
That's awesome. It's a great example of how comparison, when viewed through the right lens, can actually be a catalyst for action.
It's about turning those negative feelings into fuel for our own journey. Like, other people's successes don't diminish our own potential, they can actually expand it.
And that's the beauty of Let Them. It frees us from the shackles of comparison and allows us to focus on our own unique path.
Speaking of unique paths, let's talk about something that can be particularly challenging to navigate in adulthood: friendships. It's not as simple as it was back in high school, is it?
No kidding. It's like we're not constantly surrounded by potential friends in classrooms and on sports teams anymore.
Right. And Robbins really dives into the research on this, highlighting these three key pillars of friendship: proximity, timing, and energy. And as we get older, these pillars can shift dramatically.
That makes total sense. Like we move away for school, jobs, relationships, our schedules get filled with work, family obligations, and other commitments. It's so much harder to just like bump into people and make friends organically.
It's true. And she calls this the great scattering. Like, we're no longer naturally exposed to new people in the same way we were when we were younger. And even maintaining those existing friendships, it takes a lot more effort.
And then there's the timing factor. We might be in completely different stages of life than our friends. Some might be getting married and starting families, while others are focused on their careers or traveling the world.
Right. And even when you do find the time to connect, sometimes those differences can create a distance.
And of course, there's the energy piece. Our energy levels and priorities, they definitely shift as we get older. And those shifts can impact our friendships.
Totally. And Robbins gets really honest about this, sharing a story about how her own close-knit group of friends, the ones she had when her kids were little, drifted apart as they got older.
So it wasn't like a big falling out or anything, just life happened.
Pretty much. Like, their kids got older, their lives changed, and they just naturally grew apart. And she admits that her own negative energy probably contributed to it. Like, she was holding on to something that no longer served her.
It's a good reminder that friendships are dynamic, not static. They ebb and flow. And sometimes letting go is the healthiest thing we can do, even if it's painful.
It's about recognizing that change is inevitable, and that sometimes the best way to honor a friendship is to allow it to evolve, even if that means it looks different than it did in the past.
So how do we navigate this whole adult friendship thing? Like, if we're feeling lonely or disconnected, where do we even begin?
Well, Robbins has a really practical suggestion. Embrace the habit of going first.
Going first, what does that mean?
It means taking the initiative. Instead of waiting for friendships to magically appear, we have to be proactive about seeking them out. Like strike up conversations with people, extend invitations, put ourselves out there.
So it's about being willing to step outside of our comfort zones and make the first move.
Exactly. It might feel awkward at first, but the rewards can be so worth it. Robbins talks about how she moved to a new town in her 50s and she felt so isolated and lonely, but she made a conscious effort to connect with people.
So what did she do? Like, how does she put herself out there?
She did all sorts of things. She introduced herself to her neighbors, started conversations at the coffee shop, joined local groups and activities, anything that would give her an opportunity to meet new people.
And it worked. Like, she
Mhm.
actually made friends this way.
She did. It wasn't always easy, and there were definitely some awkward moments along the way, but she persisted. And she ended up building this whole new network of friends.
That's so inspiring. It gives me hope. It's like, even when we feel like it's too late to make new friends, it's not. We just have to be willing to put in the effort.
And she has this really helpful time frame. Give it a year. Like, don't expect to find your tribe overnight. Building those deep connections takes time. But if you keep showing up, keep being open to new experiences, trust that the right people will come into your life at the right time.
That's good advice. It's like, we have to be patient with ourselves and with the process.
Exactly. It's about trusting that the universe or God or whatever you believe in has a plan and that the right people will show up when they're supposed to.
And sometimes it's about recognizing the friendships we already have and nurturing those connections.
Absolutely. Like taking the time to reach out to old friends, making plans to get together, putting in the effort to maintain those relationships.
Speaking of putting in the effort, let's talk about something that can be really challenging: influencing change in others. Those situations where we want our loved ones to, like, adopt healthier habits or pursue their dreams.
Oh, yeah, this is a tricky one. It's like we see their potential and we just want to help them reach it.
Totally. But as Robbins points out, our good intentions can sometimes backfire. Like, when we try to force change on others, it often triggers resistance, making them less likely to embrace the very thing we're hoping to inspire.
It's like that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Exactly. And she explains this whole thing using some pretty cool science, like, remember Dr. Tali Sharot's research on the need for control? It basically shows that when people feel like their autonomy is being threatened, they naturally push back, even if the change is ultimately in their best interest.
So it's like a primal response, like we're hardwired to resist being controlled.
Makes sense. So how do we navigate this delicate balance of supporting the people we care about without triggering that resistance?
Well, Robbins lays out this super practical approach that she calls the ABC loop.
Okay, ABC loop. Tell me more.
So step A is apologize, then ask. It starts with like acknowledging that you might have been applying pressure, maybe not in the best way. And then you genuinely apologize for any negativity you've brought into the situation. And then the key is to shift the conversation to a place of genuine curiosity, asking open-ended questions to try to understand their perspective, their feelings, their goals.
So instead of telling them what to do, we're asking them what they want.
Exactly. And it's about listening to their answers without judgment, really trying to see things from their point of view.
Okay, what about step B?
Step B, back off and observe. This is where let them comes into play in a really big way. It's about giving them the space to process the conversation, to reflect on their own motivations, and to make their own decisions.
So we're letting go of that need to control the outcome.
Exactly. And it can be really hard, especially when we care so much about the person and we want what's best for them. But ultimately, it's their journey.
And it's about respecting their autonomy.
You got it. And then step C is celebrate progress while modeling change. So this is where you can subtly nudge them in the right direction by demonstrating the positive effects of the change you're hoping they'll embrace. Like if you want them to eat healthier, you might share how much more energy you have since changing your own diet. Or if you want them to be more active, invite them to join you for a walk or a workout.
So it's about leading by example and highlighting the benefits of the change.
Precisely. And the key here is to be patient and consistent. Change doesn't happen overnight.
It's about planting seeds and trusting that they'll grow in their own time.
And celebrating those small victories along the way, like even if they're not making huge leaps and bounds, acknowledge their efforts and encourage them to keep going.
It's about being a cheerleader, not a drill sergeant.
I love that. Cheerleader, not a drill sergeant. That's such a good way to put it.
It's about creating a supportive environment where they feel empowered to make positive changes, rather than feeling pressured or judged.
And that's a great segue into our next topic, which is a bit heavier but super important. Those situations where our loved ones are facing really serious challenges.
You mean like addiction, mental health struggles, things like that?
Exactly. This is where let them can feel the most difficult, but Robbins argues that it can also be the most crucial.
Okay, so how does let them apply in those situations? It seems counterintuitive to just like let someone we care about spiral.
Right. Our instinct is to jump in and fix things, to protect them from pain and hardship.
Totally. But Robbins points out that we can't fix other people's problems, no matter how much we love them or how hard we try. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to step back and allow them to face the natural consequences of their choices.
It's about recognizing that true growth often comes from learning from our own mistakes. And rescuing someone from every difficult situation can actually hinder their development of resilience and self awareness. She talks about this study by Dr. Robert Waldinger, the head of the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It's like this massive study on like happiness and well-being, and one of the key findings was that people who are able to learn from their mistakes and bounce back from adversity tend to be more resilient and happier in the long run.
So shielding people from their problems can actually do more harm than good.
It can. It's
Right.
like we think we're helping, but we're actually preventing them from developing the skills and the strength they need to navigate life's challenges.
A tough pill to swallow, but it makes sense.
It does. And Robbins illustrates this point with a really personal story about her daughter's struggles with anxiety. Like, for months, she was letting her daughter sleep on the floor of her room because she was afraid of being alone. Robbins thought she was being supportive, but she realized she was actually enabling her daughter's avoidance. Like by rescuing her from the discomfort of her anxiety, she was inadvertently reinforcing the idea that her daughter wasn't capable of coping on her own.
It's amazing how easy it is to fall into those patterns,
Yeah,
even when our intentions are good.
it is. But once Robbins had this realization, she shifted her approach. She started setting boundaries, encouraging her daughter to face her fears, and celebrating her successes.
So it was about empowering her daughter to find her own strength.
Exactly. And it wasn't easy. There were definitely some bumps along the way, but ultimately, it helped her daughter develop the coping mechanisms she needed to manage her anxiety and build her confidence.
That's such a powerful example of how let them can apply even in the most challenging situations.
It is. And Robbins emphasizes that it's not about being cold or uncaring. It's about recognizing that sometimes the best way to help is to step back and allow our loved ones to face their challenges and to learn from their own experiences.
It's about trusting them to find their own way, even if it's messy and imperfect.
And it's also about recognizing that we can't force someone to change. Like, we might be ready for them to get sober, get healthy, or turn their lives around, but they might not be there yet, and that's okay.
It's about meeting them where they are and offering our unwavering love and support without judgment or conditions,
And being there for them when they are ready to help themselves.
because ultimately change has to come from within.
Exactly. And speaking of change, let's shift gears and dive into something a little lighter: romantic relationships.
Okay, I'm all ears. Romantic relationships, that's a topic that can definitely benefit from some let them let me wisdom.
For sure. And Robbins acknowledges the complexities of modern dating, but she also emphasizes the incredible rewards of finding a partner who truly sees you, supports you, and challenges you to be your best self.
That sounds amazing. Like, where do I sign up for that?
Right. But finding that kind of love, it's not always easy. And one of the most important things Robbins says is this: if someone likes you, you'll know. If they don't, you'll be confused. Like, it sounds so simple, but it's so true.
It is. But it's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new connection and ignore those red flags. We convince ourselves that they're just busy or shy or not good at expressing their feelings, when deep down we know something's not quite right.
It's like we're so afraid of being alone that we settle for less than we deserve.
And that's where let them comes in.
Exactly. If you're constantly wondering where you stand with someone, if they're sending mixed signals or if they're not making you a priority, Robin says it might be time to step back and let them go.
So it's about trusting our intuition and not settling for crumbs.
Right. Let them not text you back. Let them cancel plans. Let them fade away without a trace. I know it's painful, but it's also incredibly empowering.
Because it's about recognizing our own worth and refusing to settle for anything less than a relationship that feels good, that's reciprocal, and that honors who we are.
And for those of us who are already in committed relationships, Robbins offers this framework for dealing with those inevitable conflicts and challenges that come up.
Okay, because let's be honest, even the best relationships have their rough patches.
They totally do. And she calls this framework the deal breaker decision, or D&E for short.
D&E, I like it. So what's the D?
The deed is decide. Like, identify the issue that's causing friction in the relationship and honestly ask yourself, can I live with this? Can I accept this about my partner, even if it never changes?
So it's about figuring out your non-negotiables, the things you're not willing to compromise on.
Exactly. And it's important to recognize that not all problems are deal breakers. Sometimes it's about adjusting your perspective, letting go of the need to change your partner, and choosing to love them for who they are, flaws and all.
Because let's face it, we all have flaws.
We totally do. But sometimes those issues are more fundamental, like maybe the values are misaligned, the differences feel insurmountable, or the relationship is just no longer serving either person.
And in those cases, the E comes in.
You got it. The E is end. Robbins puts it pretty bluntly. Either end the complaining or end the relationship. It's a bold statement, but it's about taking responsibility for your own happiness and well-being.
It's about recognizing that sometimes walking away is the kindest and most loving choice you can make, both for yourself and for your partner.
And it's important to remember that ending a relationship doesn't mean you failed. It simply means that you've chosen to prioritize your own growth and happiness.
It's about creating space for something new and better to come into your life.
And with that, we'll wrap up this first part of our deep dive into let them theory. We've covered a lot of ground today, but we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, right? My mind is officially blown. There's so much to unpack here.
There really is. And in part two, we're going to delve even deeper into the practical applications of let them, let me.
I can't wait. I'm already feeling more empowered just from this conversation.
Me too. And remember, this isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about showing up with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to let go of the need to control things we can't.
It's about embracing the messiness of life and relationships and trusting that everything unfolds as it should.
And finding freedom and joy in the process.
I'm so here for that.
Me too. Stay tuned for part two, where we'll continue exploring the transformative power of let them, let me, and discover how this seemingly simple philosophy can revolutionize the way we navigate the world and the relationships that shape our lives. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into Mel Robbins' let them theory. In part one, we really got into the nitty-gritty of let them and let me, and how those concepts can totally shift how we handle stuff, from like those annoyingly long grocery store lines to those super complicated family dynamics.
Right, and we talk about how comparing ourselves to others can be a real downer, but it can also be a good learning experience. And we discussed how understanding where someone's coming from, their frame of reference, can help us be more understanding even when we don't agree with them.
Totally. And oh yeah, we also got into how hard it can be to keep up with friendships as adults, especially with everyone moving around and just life getting in the way.
But Robbins reminds us that it's never too late to make new friends. We just have to change our mindset a little and actually put in the effort.
Exactly. But before we get too far ahead, I want to go back to something we briefly talked about, that whole idea of how let them can actually help us be more free, especially when it comes to going after the things we're passionate about.
Yeah, that really resonated with me too. It's like sometimes we hold ourselves back because we're so worried about what other people will think.
Robbins totally gets that. She even shares this story in her book about how she put off promoting her speaking business online for years, all because she was terrified of judgment.
Oh, I feel that. It's like that fear of judgment can be so real and so intense.
It is. She was imagining all these scenarios, like her friends and family judging her or making fun of her, the whole nine yards.
I totally been there. It's like our minds can create these worst case scenarios that are way more dramatic than what actually happens.
Right, and that's when let them becomes this super powerful mantra, almost like a way to set yourself free.
Okay, so in that moment, it's like we're saying, hey, think what you want. This is for me, not for you.
You got it. It's about taking back control, acknowledging that you can't control what other people think, and choosing to focus on what really matters to you.
And a lot of times, the things we're most scared to share are actually the things that will resonate most deeply with others.
That's so true. And guess what? Robbins finally took the leap and started posting about her business online. And it turned out the world didn't end. Actually, the opposite happened. Her business actually started doing really well.
That's so awesome. It shows that sometimes our fears are holding us back from amazing things.
It makes you think about how many opportunities we miss out on because we're letting fear and judgment call the shots.
Definitely. It's a good reminder to check in with ourselves and ask, like, what am I holding myself back from because of what other people might think?
But what about those situations where it's not just about our own dreams and goals? Like, what about when someone is disrespecting us, taking advantage of us, crossing our boundaries? Do we just let them walk all over us?
That's such a good question, and I think it's something a lot of people struggle with. But Robbins is very clear that let them is not about being a pushover or letting people treat us poorly.
Right. It's not about being passive or letting people walk all over us. It's about remembering that we always have choices in how we respond to difficult situations.
It's like choosing our battles wisely. Like, remember Robbins' example of the person who doesn't pick up after their dog?
Oh, yeah, that one. I still can't believe people do that. It's so inconsiderate.
It is. But Robbins says instead of immediately confronting them, let them do it a few times, then decide if it's worth addressing.
Because sometimes it's not worth the energy or the potential drama to confront every little annoyance,
Yeah,
right?
totally. But if it keeps happening, or if it's impacting you or your property, then yeah, maybe it's time to speak up.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between choosing your battles and asserting your boundaries when it really matters. But what about those really big, like world issues that can feel so overwhelming? Things like political polarization, social injustice, climate change, all the heavy stuff.
Oh yeah, those can be really tough to deal with. It's easy to feel hopeless and powerless when you're looking at those kinds of problems.
It's tempting to just want to tune it all out, right?
Totally. But Robbins argues that even in those situations, let them, let me can still help us.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, it starts with let him. Let those with different viewpoints speak their minds. Let those systems that need fixing keep running for now. Let the world unfold as it does.
I guess that sounds kind of passive, but I'm guessing the let me part is where the action is.
Exactly. Let me is where we take back our power. It's about focusing on what we can control, even when it feels like everything is out of control.
So instead of being paralyzed by fear or anger, we choose to focus on what we can do, even if it seems small.
Let me educate myself. Let me have those tough conversations. Let me support causes that are important to me.
Let me vote. Let me donate. Let me volunteer. Let me be the change I want to see in the world, even if it's just in my own little corner of it.
That's so powerful. It's about realizing that we're not powerless, even when faced with those huge systemic issues.
Right. And that shift, that sense of agency, can keep us from getting bogged down in negativity and despair.
It's a reminder that we can always choose how we respond, even when the world feels chaotic and overwhelming.
And speaking of things that can feel overwhelming, let's talk about adult friendships again. We touched on this in part one, the great scattering and all that.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, it's not as easy to make new friends as adults. We're not in school anymore, and life gets busy.
It does. And Robbins really emphasizes the importance of being intentional about creating those connections. She talks about this idea of embracing the habit of going first.
Going first, what does that mean exactly?
It means being the one to initiate things. Like, instead of waiting for other people to reach out to us, we make the first move. We strike up conversations with people. We extend invitations. We put ourselves out there.
So it's about taking the lead, even if it feels a little awkward at first.
Totally. And
Yeah.
she shares a story about when she moved to a new town in her 50s and felt really lonely. But instead of waiting for people to come to her, she made a conscious effort to connect with others.
Like, she really put herself out there.
She did. She introduced herself to her neighbors, started conversations with people at the coffee shop, joined local groups. She did all the things.
And it worked. She made real friends this way.
She did. It wasn't always easy, and there were definitely some awkward moments, but she persisted, and eventually she built this whole new network of friends.
That's so inspiring. It's like proof that it's never too late to make new friends.
Right, and Robin's advice is to be patient, give it time, and trust the process. She even suggests giving it a year, like don't get discouraged if you don't find your people right away.
That makes sense. Like, building those deep connections takes time.
It does. And sometimes it's about recognizing the friendships we already have and making an effort to nurture those connections.
Reaching out, making plans, just staying in touch.
Exactly. And that kind of segues into our next topic, which is influencing change in others. Those situations where we want to see our loved ones make healthier choices or go after their dreams.
Oh yeah, those can be tricky conversations to navigate. Like, we want to be supportive but not pushy, right?
Exactly. And as much as we might want to fix things for the people we care about, Robbins reminds us that we can't force change on anyone.
Because ultimately it has to come from them.
Right, totally. And trying to force it usually just backfires. She references Dr. Tali Sharot's research again, stuff about the need for control. When people feel like their autonomy is being threatened, their natural instinct is to resist, even if the change is good for them.
So telling someone what to do is more likely to make them dig in their heels, even if deep down they know it's the right thing to do.
Exactly. So instead of trying to control the outcome, Robbins suggests using this three-step process she calls the ABC loop.
Okay, ABC loop. I like the sound of that. What's A?
A is apologize, then ask. So it starts with acknowledging that you might have been, a little overbearing or controlling.
So we're taking responsibility for our part in the dynamic.
Right. And we're genuinely apologizing for any negativity we've brought to the situation. And then the key is to shift the conversation to a place of genuine curiosity. Instead of telling them what to do, we ask open-ended questions to try to understand their perspective, their feelings, their goals.
So it's about listening to understand, not to respond or to fix.
Totally. And it's about respecting their autonomy.
Okay, what about B?
B is back off and observe. This is where let them comes in a big way. It's about giving them the space to process the conversation, to reflect on their own motivations, and to make their own decisions.
So we're trusting them to figure things out for themselves.
Exactly. And it can be so hard, especially when we care so much, but it's crucial to let go of that need to control the outcome.
Because ultimately, it's their life, and they get to make their own choices.
Exactly. And then C is celebrate progress while modeling change. So this is where we can gently nudge them in the right direction by demonstrating the positive effects of the change we're hoping to see. Like if we want them to exercise more, we might share how much better we feel since incorporating regular workouts into our routine.
So it's about leading by example and focusing on the positives.
Exactly. And it's about being patient and consistent. Change doesn't happen overnight.
It's about planting seeds and trusting they'll grow in their own time.
And celebrating those small victories along the way. Even if they're not making huge leaps and bounds, acknowledge their efforts and encourage them to keep going.
It's about being a cheerleader, not a drill sergeant.
I love that analogy. Okay, let's talk about something that can be a little heavier. Those situations where our loved ones are facing serious challenges. Things like addiction, mental health struggles, those kinds of things. This is where let them can feel the most difficult. But Robbins argues that it can also be the most crucial.
It does feel counterintuitive. Like, how can we just let them when they're struggling with something so serious?
Right. It goes against all of our instincts to protect the people we love.
Totally. But Robbins reminds us that we can't fix other people's problems, no matter how hard we try.
She's right. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to step back and allow them to experience the natural consequences of their choices, even when it's painful to watch. She brings up Dr. Robert Waldinger's research again, the Harvard guy who did that huge study on happiness. He found that people who can learn from their mistakes and bounce back from tough situations tend to be more resilient and happier in the long run.
So trying to shield people from their problems can actually backfire?
It can. We think we're helping, but we might actually be preventing them from learning and growing.
And Robbins has a personal story about this, right? Something about her daughter.
Yeah, she talks about how her daughter was struggling with anxiety, and for months she let her daughter sleep on the floor in her room because she was afraid of being alone. Robbins thought she was being supportive, but then she realized she was actually enabling her daughter's avoidance. By rescuing her from the discomfort of her anxiety, she was kind of sending the message that her daughter wasn't capable of handling it on her own.
That's such a good point. It's so easy to fall into those patterns, even with the best of intentions.
It really is. And once Robbins had this realization, she shifted gears. She started setting boundaries, encouraging her daughter to face her fears, and celebrating her successes.
So she focused on empowering her daughter to find her own strength.
Exactly. And it wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do.
It's about believing in their ability to overcome their challenges, even when it's hard to watch them struggle.
And it's about recognizing that sometimes tough love is the kindest approach.
Robbins also talks about setting boundaries and not enabling harmful behaviors. Like if someone you love is struggling with addiction, giving them money without any conditions might actually be prolonging their dependence.
She tells the story about her husband, Chris, and how his brother refused to give him a loan when his restaurant was failing. It was a tough decision, but it was the wake-up call Chris needed to turn things around.
Wow, that's powerful. It shows that sometimes the best way to help is to step back and let them face the consequences of their actions.
It is, and it's about recognizing that not everyone is ready to change. We might be ready for them to get sober, get healthy, or turn their life around, but they might not be there yet.
And that's okay. We can't force them to change, but we can offer our love and support without judgment.
And be there for them when they are ready to help themselves.
Because ultimately, that's when real change can happen.
All right, ready for something a little lighter? Let's talk about romantic relationships.
Yes. Romantic relationships, that's definitely an area where we can all use a little let them let me wisdom.
For sure. And Robbins acknowledges all the complexities of modern dating, but she also highlights the amazing rewards of finding a partner who truly gets you, supports you, and encourages you to be your best self.
That's the dream, right? Finding that kind of deep connection and partnership.
Totally. But Robbins emphasizes that finding that kind of love starts with self-worth. Like if you don't believe you're worthy of love and respect, you're more likely to settle for less than you deserve.
It makes sense. If we don't value ourselves, we're more likely to attract people who don't value us either.
And she has this one piece of advice that I think is so simple but so profound. If someone likes you, you'll know. If they don't, you'll be confused.
It's so true. It's like we try to overthink it and come up with all these excuses for why someone's not treating us the way we want to be treated.
We convince ourselves they're just busy or shy or whatever, when deep down we know something's not quite right.
And that's where let them comes in, right?
Yes. If you're constantly wondering where you stand with someone, if they're sending mixed signals or if they're just not making you a priority, Robin says it's time to step back and let them go.
And let them not text back. Let them cancel plans. Let them fade away. I know it's hard, but it's also so empowering.
It is. It's about recognizing your worth and refusing to settle for crumbs.
And creating space for someone who's truly excited to be with you, someone who chooses you and makes you a priority.
Now, for those of us who are already in committed relationships, Robbins offers a framework for dealing with conflict and challenges that arise over time.
Because even the best relationships have their ups and downs.
They do. And she calls this the deal breaker decision, or D&E for short.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about the D&E thing.
So the D is decide. When you're facing an issue in your relationship, you need to identify what it is and honestly ask yourself, can I live with this? Can I accept this about my partner, even if it never changes?
So it's about getting clear on your non-negotiables, those things that are deal breakers for you.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that not every problem is a deal breaker. Sometimes it's about adjusting your perspective, accepting your partner for who they are, flaws and all.
Because we all have flaws. Nobody's perfect.
Exactly. But sometimes those issues are more fundamental. Maybe your values are misaligned, or the differences just feel insurmountable.
And that's where the E comes in.
You got it. The E is end. Robbins puts it pretty bluntly. Either end the complaining or end the relationship.
Wow, that's pretty direct. But it's about taking ownership of your happiness, right?
Totally. It's
Mhm.
about recognizing that you have a choice. And sometimes walking away is the kindest and most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for your partner.
And it's about creating space for something new and better to come into your life.
And it's important to remember that ending a relationship doesn't mean you failed. It just means that you've chosen to prioritize your own growth and happiness.
It's about honoring yourself and what you truly deserve.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive into let them theory.
We really have. From navigating those tricky family dynamics and overcoming the comparison trap to creating new friendships and setting healthy boundaries in our romantic relationships.
And it all comes back to those core concepts of let them, let me, and how they can help us release the need to control external circumstances and empower us to focus on what we can control: our own choices, our own actions, our own responses.
It's about embracing the messiness of life and trusting that things will unfold as they should.
And finding freedom and joy in the process. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore the most important relationship of all, the one we have with ourselves, and discover how embracing our own let me era can lead to a life of greater authenticity, purpose, and fulfillment. All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Mel Robbins' Let Them theory. We've covered a lot of ground, from those little everyday frustrations to those big, heavy life challenges. But I think one of the most important things we've talked about is how letting go of that need to control everything, especially other people, can be super freeing and actually lead to stronger relationships.
Right, and we've explored how that let them idea can help us deal with everything from family drama to work stress to, those people who just love to push our buttons.
And we even talked about how comparison can be both a trap and a teacher, and how understanding where someone else is coming from, their frame of reference, can help us be more compassionate and understanding even when we don't agree with them.
It's been a lot to take in, but I feel like I'm already starting to see the world a little differently.
Yeah, me too. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something Robbins emphasizes throughout the book, and that's the importance of applying these same let them let me principles to the most important relationship we have, the one with ourselves.
It's so easy to get caught up in trying to please everyone else, to meet everyone else's expectations that we forget to take care of ourselves.
It's like we're so busy trying to manage the world outside of us that we neglect the world inside of us.
Totally. And that's where let them, let me can be so transformative, not just in our relationships with others, but in our relationship with ourselves.
So, how do we actually do that? Like, where do we even begin to apply these principles to our own inner world?
Well, I think it starts with asking ourselves some honest questions like, are we setting healthy boundaries? Are we taking care of our physical and emotional well-being? Are we giving ourselves permission to pursue the things that light us up, even if they don't make sense to other people?
It's about recognizing that we're worthy of love and respect, regardless of what anyone else thinks or says.
Right. And that our worth doesn't come from external validation, it comes from within.
It's about letting go of that inner critic, that voice that tells us we're not good enough or that we're not doing enough.
It's about giving ourselves the same grace and compassion that we offer to others.
Robbins uses this beautiful analogy of the sky to illustrate this point. Like, imagine the sky constantly changing, sometimes clear and blue, sometimes filled with clouds or storms. We can't control the weather, right? But we can control how we respond to it.
We can choose to appreciate the variety, the unpredictability, the beauty of it all. Just like we can choose to embrace the fullness of our own lives with all its imperfections and challenges.
It's a great analogy. It's about letting go of the illusion of control and surrendering to the present moment.
And in that surrender, we often find a sense of peace and freedom.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into let them theory, I want to leave you with this question. What would it look like for you to fully embrace your own let me era?
What would it look like to prioritize your well-being, to pursue your passions, to set those healthy boundaries, and to treat yourself with kindness and compassion?
What are you holding yourself back from because of fear or judgment? What would it look like to let go of those fears and step into your full potential?
We hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about and some tools to use in your own life.
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress, not perfection.
It's about showing up with curiosity, with compassion, and with a willingness to let go of the need to control everything and everyone.
It's about embracing the journey, trusting the process, and believing in yourself.
We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences with Let Them Theory. Feel free to share your insights, your aha moments, and your own Let Me stories.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep letting go.